and I have to investigate this again. And Göbekli Tepe was a game changer, but I think it's a game changer for everything.
For 25 years, archaeologists dug at Gobekli Tepe thinking they understood the site. Then, artificial intelligence spotted something impossible. The massive stone circles weren't randomly placed. They formed a perfect triangle, planned from the very beginning by people living 11,000 years ago. Scientists are now questioning everything. How did hunter-gatherers master geometry before farming even existed? And why did they bury their masterpiece immediately after building it? The answers AI revealed are rewriting human history, and the implications are terrifying. In 1963, a group of American and Turkish researchers were walking across a lonely hilltop in southeastern Turkey. The place was called Gobekli Tepe, which means Potbelly Hill. It didn't look like much, just a dusty rise of land scattered with a few chunks of limestone sticking out of the ground. They assumed it was just an abandoned medieval cemetery and moved on. For the next 30 years, the hill was forgotten, sitting quietly above the wide plains of Harran. Then, in 1994, everything changed. A German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt returned to that same hill. The moment he saw it, something clicked. He later said that as soon as he stood on that rise, he felt this wasn't just a hill, it was a Stone Age site, and a massive one. The stones that others had mistaken for gravestones weren't graves at all. They were something far older. He looked at the gentle curves of the mound and knew he was standing above something extraordinary. Schmidt came back in 1995 with a full team and started digging. They revealed a series of massive stone circles made of towering pillars, each shaped like a giant T and standing up to 5.5 meters high. These weren't just rough slabs of rock. Each pillar was carefully carved, polished, and decorated with detailed images of wild animals, strange symbols, and even what looked like human limbs. One particular enclosure, known as Enclosure D, stood out. It was the oldest and most complete circle, and right at its heart stood two colossal pillars, over 5 meters tall, covered in carvings of lions, foxes, vultures, snakes, scorpions, and gazelles. These creatures weren't chosen randomly. They were drawn from the wild landscape that surrounded the temple over 11,000 years ago, a time when the region was rich with game and untouched by cities or agriculture. But it wasn't just animals carved into the stone. Some pillars had strange shapes, like H's and V's, and even arms and hands, as if the pillars themselves were stylized human figures, maybe gods or ancestors. One of the most famous stones, Pillar 43, often called the Vulture Stone, showed a scorpion, a vulture, and other symbols arranged so precisely that many believe it might be a message, a recording, or even a form of prehistoric storytelling. The level of craftsmanship was astonishing. These people had no metal tools. Everything was carved using flint. Yet they managed to chisel out blocks of limestone weighing tons and transport them just far enough to be arranged into circles. The bedrock on the hill made this possible. It was like nature had given them a giant open-air workshop. Still, even with the natural advantages, moving and erecting those pillars would have taken immense planning, teamwork, and effort. It wasn't a job for a few hunters. It needed hundreds of people, ropes, levers, and possibly weeks of labor for each piece. Then came the part that puzzled everyone even more. After building these stunning structures, the people of Gobekli Tepe began burying them. They didn't abandon the site. They filled the enclosures with rubble, tools, bones, and debris, as if performing some strange ceremonial act. Once buried, they moved to a new spot nearby and built another circle, then buried that one too. This process went on for centuries, and over time, It created the large artificial hill we see today. Nobody knows exactly why they did this. Some believe each circle marked a particular event, maybe the death of a leader, the end of a cycle, and the burial was part of the ritual. But that act of burial, whatever its purpose, had an unexpected gift for archaeologists thousands of years later. It preserved the pillars and carvings in near-perfect condition. When Schmidt's team cleared away the layers from Enclosure D, they found carvings still sharp, untouched by weather, as if they had just been made. The site also gave clues about what life might have looked like back then. Over 100,000 animal bones were found, many cracked and cut from butchery. Around 60% of those bones came from gazelles, suggesting large-scale hunting. Other bones came from boars, deer, sheep, and birds like cranes and ducks. The evidence pointed to mass feasts, possibly seasonal events where people gathered from miles around. Massive stone basins found nearby may have been used for preparing food or drinks. Some archaeologists even believe the people might have brewed an early form of beer using wild grains, offering a picture of feasting, worship, and celebration all in one place. The carvings themselves give more than just decoration. They hint at beliefs, rituals, and possibly even a form of mythology. Foxes appear again and again, carved on multiple pillars, their skulls placed in the buried layers, suggesting they were seen as spiritually important. Vultures also appear frequently, and this has led some to think that the people of Gobekli Tepe practiced sky burial, where the dead were left in the open for birds to consume. This wasn't uncommon in early human societies, especially where beliefs linked vultures to the soul's journey after death. Schmidt once suggested that Gobekli Tepe might have been a sacred necropolis, a place where the dead were honored under the open sky. From the top of the hill, surrounded by wild animals and symbols of death and rebirth, the souls of the dead might have looked out across the sweeping plains, a place of silence and eternal watching. As Schmidt put it, they were looking out over a hunter's dream. What Gobekli Tepe represents is still debated. Was it a burial site? A gathering place? A sacred calendar? A temple to gods we'll never know? No one can say for sure. But what's undeniable is this. It was built at a time when humans were still nomadic, when agriculture was just beginning to take shape. And yet the scale of its construction demands organization, belief, and cooperation on a massive level. The people behind Gobekli Tepe weren't farmers. They weren't even settled villagers. They were still hunter-gatherers. There were no signs of domesticated wheat or barley, no sheep, no goats. These were groups still living off wild plants and animals. And yet, they came together and built this place nearly 12,000 years ago, around 9600 BCE. That's long before the pyramids of Egypt, long before Stonehenge, and long before writing ever appeared. It changed everything. Until then, the idea was that agriculture came first, and then large buildings and organized religion followed. But Gobekli Tepe flipped that idea on its head. Archaeologists like Klaus Schmidt and Joris Peters studied the region closely. They found that the land around Gobekli Tepe was rich in wild resources. There were wild sheep and goats roaming the hills, and wild grains like einkorn wheat growing in the fields. The ingredients for farming were all there, just waiting to be used. And then something strange happened. Within just a few centuries of Gobekli Tepe's peak, nearby communities began domesticating those very plants and animals. At a site only 20 miles away, genetic testing showed the earliest evidence of domesticated wheat around 8500 BCE. That was only a few hundred years after the great stone pillars of Gobekli Tepe were raised. Herding began soon after too, with early signs of sheep and pig management appearing within 1,000 years. This raised a huge question. What if people didn't start farming first and then build temples? What if they built the temples first and then started farming just to keep those places running? That was Klaus Schmidt's theory, and it shook the world of archaeology. He believed that religion came first. The need to gather, to worship, to create something sacred. Those were the forces that pulled people together. But to bring dozens or even hundreds of workers to one site, to keep them there long enough to carve and move stone, weighing tens of tons, you needed food. You couldn't rely on wild berries and deer forever. People had to start planting grains and managing herds just to make all this possible. In Schmidt's words, the effort to build Gobekli Tepe literally laid the groundwork for civilization. Not everyone agreed. Some researchers suggested there may have been small settlements nearby that haven't yet been discovered. Maybe people were already starting to settle down when they built the site. But even so, the level of organization shown at Gobekli Tepe is something no one expected from hunter-gatherers. They weren't supposed to have specialists or leaders or long-term planning, but clearly they did. The Turkish government recognized how important the discovery was. In 2018, Gobekli Tepe was officially added to the UNESCO World Heritage List. The report described it as one of the first major examples of human-made monumental architecture and a symbol of early creative genius. It also noted that building the site required skilled craftsmen, organized labor, and likely even some kind of hierarchy. The people behind it weren't just surviving anymore. They were experimenting with roles, rituals, and responsibilities. By around 9600 BCE, the world was changing fast. Gobekli Tepe sits right at the edge of that transformation. It's a place where ideas about gods, community, and structure began to take shape. It wasn't just a bunch of stones on a hill. It was a signal that something new had begun. The moment when scattered bands of hunters started becoming something else, something closer to us. In 2020, something unexpected happened. Instead of digging deeper, a team of researchers turned to computers. One of them was Gil Haklay from the Israel Antiquities Authority. Working with Professor Avi Gopher from Tel Aviv University, they used a digital tool designed to spot patterns in architecture, something like a primitive version of AI. They wanted to know if the massive stone circles at Gobekli Tepe were just built randomly over time, or if they were part of something bigger. When the results came in, they were stunned. The three largest enclosures, labeled D, C, and B, were all placed in a way that formed an almost perfect equilateral triangle. This wasn't luck. The chance of three separate structures accidentally aligning like that is practically zero. What they realized was that the builders must have had a plan from the very beginning. They likely used ropes or cords to lay out the triangle on the ground, then placed each enclosure exactly where the corners landed. That means they understood geometry, not just roughly, but with a level of precision that seemed impossible for people living 11,000 years ago. Until then, many believed Gobekli Tepe was built gradually by different groups over hundreds of years, each adding their own ring of stones with no clear connection. But this new discovery flipped that idea on its head. These stone circles weren't just placed wherever the builders felt like it. They were designed to work together as part of a single unified project. It was like uncovering a hidden blueprint that had been buried not in the earth, but in the layout itself. What made this even more remarkable was that it took a computer to see it. The algorithm used by Haklay was based on standard deviation mapping, a way to scan thousands of points and detect shapes like triangles or circles. It wasn't advanced AI in the Hollywood sense, but it did exactly what a good AI assistant should do. It spotted what the human eye had missed. When their findings were published in the Cambridge Archaeological Journal that same year, headlines exploded with a simple but powerful idea that Gobekli Tepe had been decoded by AI. According to Science Daily, the researchers showed that the three huge enclosures, some reaching up to 20 meters wide, were all part of a single construction plan. This kind of organized building had always been thought to come much later, with the rise of cities. But Gobekli Tepe pushed that timeline way back. People in the Stone Age, still technically hunter-gatherers, had figured out how to plan something so massive and build it with coordination that still stuns modern architects. Professor Gopher summed it up simply. The site's design and the quality of the stonework were far beyond what you'd expect from that period. Massive pillars, intricate carvings, and perfect alignments. All of it showed a level of planning no one thought Neolithic people had. These weren't just workers stacking rocks. This was the work of specialists, people who understood measurement, planning, symmetry, and maybe even astronomy. The idea that early humans could stretch ropes across an empty hilltop and mark exact points for a sacred structure seems surreal. And yet, that's exactly what the evidence suggests. The people who built Gobekli Tepe didn't just follow instincts. They followed a vision. This discovery also opened up bigger questions. If these enclosures were aligned geometrically, was it just about structure? Or was it also spiritual? Were they pointing towards something in the sky? Stars, seasons, or sacred directions? That part is still debated. But what's certain now is that this wasn't a chaotic mess of random stone circles. It was a masterpiece of prehistoric design. Lee Clare, who leads current excavations at the site, explained why this matters. Massive communal projects like this could help forge group identity. In other words, building Gobekli Tepe may have helped early humans come together as a society, shifting from scattered families into something more organized. That means this discovery doesn't just change what we know about ancient buildings. It changes what we know about how civilization began. In 2017, a bold theory emerged. Dr. Martin Sweatman, an engineer from the University of Edinburgh, looked at the carvings on one specific pillar, Pillar 43, often called the Vulture Stone. He didn't see myth, he saw astronomy. Along with his colleague Dimitrios Tsikritsis, he argued that the carved animals were constellations, arranged to mark a date. And not just any date. According to their study, the carvings recorded a cosmic disaster, a comet strike around 10,150 BCE, one that may have triggered the sudden freeze known as the Younger Dryas. That cold period lasted from around 10,800 BCE to 9,600 BCE, and some scientists have long suspected that a comet impact could have caused it. Sweatman believed the people at Gobekli Tepe witnessed that event, survived it, and carved it into stone. If true, that would make Pillar 43 the oldest known record of an astronomical catastrophe. And Gobekli Tepe, the world's first observatory. At first, mainstream archaeologists were skeptical. Matching carvings to constellations can be tricky. It's easy to see patterns that aren't really there. And archaeology isn't usually taught with much focus on the stars. But Sweatman didn't stop. He kept digging. And in 2021, another clue came to light. A researcher named Dr. John D. Gordon noticed something odd about the Vulture Stone. There were small V-shaped carvings scattered across the pillar, almost like tallies. Sweatman took a closer look and started counting. He found 12 groups of marks that seemed to match the 12 lunar months. But there was more. 11 extra symbols appeared alongside them, just enough to make a full 365-day year. In other words, this wasn't just a star map. It was a calendar, a lunisolar one, tracking both the moon and the sun. One V was even carved into the neck of a bird, perhaps pointing to a single special day. Sweatman thought it marked the summer solstice. If he was right, then Gobekli Tepe wasn't just a monument. It was a clock, a memory carved in stone, a warning and a guide. Sweatman believed that same bird symbol might represent the summer solstice constellation from 10,850 BCE. Using that clue, he went back over Pillar 43 and also studied Pillar 33 from nearby Enclosure D. The pieces started to fit. He now believes the site marked not only the date of a major comet strike, but also a 27-day meteor shower that followed, possibly the Taurids. This shower still passes Earth today and is thought to be connected to the same comet. In 2024, Sweatman published a detailed paper in the journal Time and Mind, arguing that Gobekli Tepe's carvings form the oldest calendar known to history. If his analysis is correct, then these ancient people tracked the moon's cycles, the sun's path, and major cosmic events, thousands of years before anyone thought such knowledge existed. He believes they even understood precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that shifts the stars' positions over thousands of years. That idea is staggering. The Greek astronomer Hipparchus discovered precession around 150 BCE. If Gobekli Tepe's builders knew about it, they were 10,000 years ahead. Of course, not everyone agrees. Some archaeologists argue that we simply don't have enough evidence. Without written explanations, how can we be sure the carvings mean what Sweatman says? Maybe the images are symbolic. Maybe they're spiritual. Maybe we're reading too much into them. But the theory refuses to fade. In 2024, even ArtNet News published an article asking if the vulture stone might be the earliest lunisolar calendar ever found. Other researchers have proposed different star alignments at the site, some pointing to Sirius or other bright stars, all suggesting that Gobekli Tepe's builders were watching the sky carefully. Whether these people were driven by fear or faith, something pushed them to carve these patterns into stone. Sweatman believes the comet impact was such a defining event that it gave birth to a new religion, a new way of seeing the world. He says this might even explain the rise of temples and organized belief systems. For him, Gobekli Tepe's story is a cosmic one, a story of survival, a story of memory, a story where people looked up, saw disaster, and decided never to forget it. The stone carvings endured for thousands of years. Long after the builders were gone, the pillars stood, silent, strange, and waiting to be read. If Sweatman is right, they tell us that the first astronomers weren't Greeks or Babylonians. They were hunter-gatherers, huddled under ancient skies, watching fire fall from the heavens. They recorded what they saw not with paper or clay, but with chiseled stone. And maybe, just maybe, they hoped someone would understand it someday. After all the digging, the carvings, the strange animals, and the endless layers of stone, one question still lingers. Why did they build it? What was Gobekli Tepe really for? People were carving and moving giant stone pillars over 11,000 years ago, long before cities, before farming had fully taken hold, before even writing existed. These weren't simple people making simple shelters. This was something else entirely. So what made them do it? The most common idea is that Gobekli Tepe was some sort of sacred meeting place, maybe like a temple or a festival ground. Archaeologists noticed that there are no houses, no fireplaces, no signs that anyone actually lived there. It's not a village. It seems more like a place people traveled to for specific reasons. They probably didn't come every day, or even every week. It might have been a seasonal thing. People may have arrived in spring or autumn, stayed for a while, and then left again. And they didn't come alone. They brought animals, they butchered them, and they feasted. Thousands of animal bones were found all over the site. Gazelles, boars, birds, enough to show that these weren't quiet gatherings. These were massive events. Some believe different groups gathered there, clans from across the region, who didn't live together but shared beliefs. Each circle of pillars could belong to one of these groups. One might have mostly fox carvings, another filled with boars or vultures, almost like a totem system. It's possible each group had its own spirit animal, and Gobekli Tepe was the one place where everyone came together under the same spiritual sky. The idea is that it helped bind people, gave them a reason to cooperate, to form early community ties before real cities ever existed. The man who led the main excavations, Klaus Schmidt, believed something even bigger. He thought Gobekli Tepe was the world's first temple, a place built not for people to live in, but for people to connect with gods or spirits. Those tall, T-shaped pillars weren't just abstract. Some have human arms carved along their sides, like they were meant to be bodies, big, stylized, headless bodies. That made Schmidt wonder if the pillars were actually representations of mythic ancestors or spiritual figures. The hilltop location supports this idea. You can see the whole horizon from up there. It feels like a place meant to be closer to the heavens. And there's no sign of farming, cooking, or sleeping anywhere near the main enclosures. Everything points to ritual, not routine life. What makes it even more haunting is what they found in 2017. A team led by researcher Julia Gresky discovered fragments of 3 human skulls. But these weren't just buried and forgotten. They had been carved. Someone had taken the time to make deep grooves into them, and in one case, drill a hole. These weren't cuts made to remove flesh. They were smooth, straight, and clearly intentional. Red ochre was found on them too, meaning they were painted. It's the first solid evidence of carved human skulls anywhere in the world. One of the skulls had grooves in just the right places to allow a rope to be tied around it and hung with the face held upright. So someone had been suspending these skulls, maybe from ceilings, maybe from wooden posts inside the stone circles. This led to a darker theory. Maybe Gobekli Tepe was also a place of the dead, a place where ancestors were honored or even worshipped. There are carvings of headless humans. One pillar even shows a figure holding a decapitated head. Clay figurines with missing heads were found nearby too. All of this points toward a strange cult, something focused on the power of the skull. The people might have believed the spirit of a person lived inside the head, and that by keeping the skull close, they could access its power. Whether it was about remembering ancestors, protecting the living, or displaying enemies as trophies, we don't know. But it adds a shadowy layer to the story. Suddenly, you can picture a priest or a shaman walking through those ancient stones with skulls hanging beside them, whispering to the dead or calling down some ancient spirit. This theory fits into another idea that emerged over time. Maybe Gobekli Tepe wasn't just about humans, but also animals. All across the site, animals are carved into the stones. Some are predators, others are scavengers. Snakes, scorpions, vultures, foxes. The variety is overwhelming. Some archaeologists think these animals weren't random decorations. They might represent different spirits or forces of nature. In many tribal cultures, certain animals are seen as guides between the living and the dead. Snakes shed their skin and are reborn. Vultures consume the dead and clean the world. Scorpions are dangerous, but powerful. If the people at Gobekli Tepe believed the world was full of spirits living inside animals, then these carvings weren't just art. They were part of rituals. Some experts now think the whole place was one massive animist shrine. Each circle of stones, each set of animal carvings, might have been tied to a different group or a different spirit. The T-shaped pillars, which look like people with animal carvings beside them, could be imagined as half-human, half-animal beings. Ancestors who had crossed over. Teachers. Guardians. Maybe they believed these figures gave them knowledge of hunting, of healing, of surviving, and the people came to thank them or ask for help. Even other nearby places from the same period hint at this. A site called Nevaluchori, not far from Gobekli Tepe, had smaller pillars like this inside people's homes, almost like personal shrines. It's possible Gobekli Tepe was the grand version, the spiritual capital, where all the local groups came to gather, to perform shared rituals, and to remember their roots. Maybe it was a response to change. As people began to settle down and the old hunter-gatherer ways began to fade, they needed something to hold them together. Something that reminded them who they were. Something older than writing, older than farming. Something built in stone and spirit.